One of the most underestimated forces in human psychology is silence. We tend to think communication is about what we say, but in many situations, what we refuse to say can have an even greater psychological impact. When you suddenly withdraw your attention from someone, you remove something they have become accustomed to receiving, and the human mind does not respond well to unexplained changes. Think about what happens when someone who normally responds to your messages suddenly stops. At first, you may assume they are busy. Then you begin to wonder, did I say something wrong? Are they angry? Have they lost interest? What are they thinking? The unanswered question begins occupying mental space, and this is where silence becomes psychologically powerful. People are often less disturbed by a negative answer than by uncertainty. A rejection gives you information. Silence gives you a question. And the mind naturally tries to complete unanswered questions. It searches for explanations, replays conversations, examines small details, and imagines possibilities. In that sense, ignoring someone can create tension not because you have attacked them, but because you have removed the information they were using to understand their position with you. This is an important principle of human behavior. Attention creates feedback, and feedback creates certainty. When you constantly reassure someone, respond immediately, explain yourself, and make your feelings completely predictable, you give them a clear psychological map. They know where they stand. They know how you will react. They know how much access they have to you. But when you become less predictable, that map disappears. Now, this does not mean that you should start ignoring people as a childish strategy for making them chase you. That is manipulation, and manipulation eventually destroys trust. The deeper lesson is about learning when your attention is valuable and when it is being taken for granted. There are moments when silence is more powerful than an argument. If someone deliberately provokes you, responding emotionally may give them exactly what they wanted, evidence that they can control your state of mind. But if you remain composed and refuse to participate, you change the entire dynamic. You are no longer reacting to their behavior. You are choosing your response. And that distinction matters. Psychological strength is not demonstrated by making another person anxious. It is demonstrated by your ability to remain internally stable when someone else is trying to disturb you. Silence becomes powerful when it comes from self-control rather than insecurity. Consider also what your absence communicates. When your attention has always been available, people may unconsciously begin treating it as a permanent resource. They stop appreciating it because they assume it will always be there. But when you establish boundaries around your time, energy, and attention, you remind both yourself and others that access to you is not automatic. The real question then is not, how can I ignore someone so they become obsessed with me? The better question is, what happens when I stop giving my attention to what does not deserve it? That question shifts the entire philosophy. You are no longer playing a psychological game. You are reclaiming control over your own attention, because attention is one of the most valuable things you possess. Give it deliberately, withdraw it deliberately, and never allow someone else's behavior to decide where your mind must live. Sometimes the strongest message you can send is not spoken at all. Your attention is a choice, not an obligation. There is another principle operating beneath all of this, and it is one that people often understand instinctively but rarely examine carefully. We tend to value what we cannot constantly possess. Think about attention. When someone gives you their time every minute of every day, their messages arrive immediately, their presence is always available, and they constantly seek your approval. That attention can gradually become ordinary. Not because the person has become less valuable, but because the mind adapts to what is predictable. Human beings are remarkably good at adapting to abundance. What once felt special can eventually feel normal. What once created excitement can become expected. And once something becomes expected, we often stop noticing its value. This is why unlimited availability can sometimes weaken the impact of your presence. If people know you will always answer, always explain, always return, and always make yourself available, there is very little psychological uncertainty. They do not have to wonder about your attention because they already possess it. But when you create healthy distance, something changes. Suddenly, Your attention becomes something that must be earned rather than assumed. Your absence creates contrast. And contrast is one of the ways the mind recognizes value. Imagine walking into a room where a particular sound has been playing continuously. After a while, you barely notice it. Then the sound stops. Suddenly, the silence becomes noticeable. Nothing new has been added, something has simply been removed. Human relationships can work in a similar way. When your presence is constant, people may focus less on what your presence contributes, but when you step back, they may become aware of what they previously took for granted. Your conversations, your support, your energy, even your small gestures can suddenly appear different because they are no longer guaranteed. But there is a crucial distinction here. Scarcity should not become a cheap psychological trick. Pretending to be unavailable while secretly waiting for someone to chase you keeps you psychologically dependent on their reaction. You may appear distant on the outside while remaining completely obsessed on the inside. That is not power. Real power comes from having a life and a sense of purpose that does not revolve around another person's attention. You do not become valuable because you make someone miss you. You become valuable when your time, attention, and energy are directed toward things that genuinely matter. Your work, your principles, your relationships, your growth, your responsibilities, then your distance has authenticity behind it. And this is where the psychology becomes deeper. When you stop constantly seeking validation, people begin encountering a different version of you. You are no longer communicating, "Please notice me." You are communicating through your behavior. I have somewhere meaningful to place my attention. That creates respect because independence is difficult to manipulate. The person who needs constant attention can easily be controlled by the person who withholds it. But the person who has learned to live without external validation becomes much harder to control. They can walk away without creating a dramatic scene. They can say no without feeling guilty. They can remain silent without desperately waiting for a reaction. So do not focus on becoming scarce merely to increase someone else's desire for you. Become selective because your attention is finite. You only have so much time, so much energy, so much emotional capacity. Spend it where it creates value. Because the moment you stop treating your attention as unlimited, you begin teaching others and yourself that your presence has worth. Do not become scarce to be wanted. Become purposeful enough that your attention must be earned. And once you understand that your attention has value, you begin to notice something even more revealing. Distance can expose people's true intentions. When you are constantly available to someone, it is difficult to know exactly why they are staying close to you. Are they genuinely interested in you? Do they respect you? Do they appreciate what you bring into their life? Or are they simply accustomed to having access to your attention, your resources, your emotional energy? As long as you continue providing all of that, these questions can remain hidden. But the moment you establish a boundary, the dynamic changes. You stop answering every demand. You stop explaining yourself endlessly. You stop rushing to repair every uncomfortable moment. You create a little distance, and suddenly the other person's behavior becomes information. A person who genuinely respects you may notice the boundary and accept it. They may ask what happened, give you space, or approach you with greater consideration. Their response tells you something important. They value the relationship more than their ability to control it, but someone who is primarily interested in access may respond very differently. They may become angry. They may accuse you of changing. They may suddenly become desperate for your attention. They may attempt to provoke you simply to confirm that they can still influence your emotions. This is where silence becomes less about controlling another person and more about observing them. You are no longer arguing about their intentions, you are watching their behavior. And behavior is often more revealing than words. People can tell you they respect your boundaries while repeatedly crossing them. They can tell you they care while only appearing when they need something. They can call you important while treating your time as though it belongs to them. You do not always need to confront every contradiction immediately. Sometimes you simply need to step back and observe what happens when you stop doing the work of maintaining the relationship by yourself. This is a difficult lesson because many people are afraid of what they might discover. They keep giving because giving allows them to avoid the possibility that the relationship is one-sided. They keep responding because silence might reveal that the other person was never truly invested. They keep tolerating disrespect because walking away would force them to accept a painful truth. But truth, even when uncomfortable, is useful. Distance can function like a psychological mirror. It removes some of the noise and allows you to see patterns more clearly. And there is another important lesson here. Do not judge someone's character by how they behave when everything is going their way. Watch what happens when they hear no. Watch what happens when you disagree. Watch what happens when you become less available. Watch what happens when they realize they cannot easily influence you. That is often where character becomes visible. A healthy relationship can survive boundaries. Genuine respect does not require constant access. Real affection does not demand that you surrender your independence. So when someone reacts badly to your boundaries, do not immediately rush to punish them or prove yourself. Observe, learn. Let their behavior provide information. Because sometimes the greatest clarity comes when you stop talking long enough to see who respects you without being given unlimited access to you. Do not fear the distance that reveals the truth. Fear the closeness that keeps you from seeing it. And this brings us to one of the most important principles in dealing with difficult people. The person who can control their emotional reaction often has far more power than the person trying to control the situation. Think about what happens when someone provokes you. They make a disrespectful comment. They deliberately ignore you. They challenge your authority. They say something designed to make you angry. Your first instinct may be to respond immediately, to defend yourself, explain yourself, or make sure they understand that they have crossed a line. But there is a hidden danger in reacting too quickly. The moment someone can reliably trigger your emotions, they have discovered a lever they can pull. They may not control your entire life, but they have learned something valuable. They know how to move you. And once you understand this, you begin to see why emotional discipline is so important. The objective is not to become cold or emotionless. That is impossible, and it would not even be desirable. The objective is to create a space between what happens to you and how you choose to respond. That small space is where your freedom exists. Someone insults you, you feel anger. That feeling is real, but you do not have to immediately turn that feeling into action. You can pause. Or you can observe, you can ask yourself, what response actually serves your interests? This is where silence can become powerful. Instead of giving someone an angry reaction, you give them nothing, not because you are afraid to respond, but because you refuse to let another person's behavior dictate your emotional state. And this can be surprisingly difficult. We often believe that strength means having the perfect comeback. We imagine that the strongest person in the room is the one who can dominate an argument, deliver the sharpest insult, or make the other person feel small. But those are often displays of insecurity disguised as strength. True strength can look much quieter. It can look like walking away from an argument that has become pointless. It can look like refusing to defend yourself against every accusation. It can look like taking a few moments before answering an emotionally charged message. It can look like recognizing that someone is trying to provoke you and deciding not to participate. This does not mean tolerating disrespect indefinitely. Boundaries sometimes require direct action. There are moments when you should speak clearly and firmly, but even then, the difference is emotional control. You are responding because you have decided that a response is necessary, not because someone successfully pushed a button inside you. That distinction changes everything. When you become less reactive, people lose one of their easiest methods of influencing you. They cannot predict that anger will make you act. They cannot depend on guilt to make you surrender. They cannot use drama to pull you into endless arguments. Your calm becomes a boundary. And perhaps the deepest lesson is that you should not measure your power by how strongly you can affect other people. Measure it by how little unnecessary control other people have over you. Anyone can become angry. Anyone can retaliate. Anyone can send the message they later regret. The disciplined person pauses, they observe, they choose, And sometimes, after seeing the situation clearly, they say nothing at all because silence is most powerful when it comes from mastery rather than weakness. Do not surrender control of your mind to the person who is trying to provoke it. And once you learn to control your reactions, another principle becomes clear. Sometimes the most powerful way to protect your value is to create distance. We live in a culture that often confuses availability with kindness. We are encouraged to answer immediately, accommodate constantly, explain ourselves repeatedly, and remain accessible even when people have stopped treating us with respect. But there is a point where constant availability stops being generosity and becomes self-abandonment. Your time is a boundary, your attention is a boundary, your emotional energy is a boundary. And if you give these things away without limits, eventually other people begin to assume they have a right to them. This is why strategic distance can be so important. It is not about punishing someone. It is not about creating jealousy. It is not about disappearing simply to make another person chase you. It is about recognizing when continued engagement is costing you more than it is giving you. Imagine someone repeatedly speaks to you disrespectfully. You explain yourself. They apologize. The behavior happens again. You explain yourself once more. Another apology follows, and the cycle continues. At some point, another explanation is not going to solve the problem. A boundary might. You step back, you reduce contact, you stop participating in the same argument, you refuse to keep rewarding behavior that violates your standards. That withdrawal communicates something words sometimes cannot. Access to you is connected to how you are treated. This is not cruelty, it is consequence. And there is an important philosophical difference between the two. Cruelty seeks to cause unnecessary pain. A boundary seeks to prevent unnecessary damage. When you create distance because someone has repeatedly crossed your limits, you are not necessarily trying to make them suffer. You are deciding what you will and will not allow into your life. That decision requires courage because people may accuse you of being cold. They may tell you that you have changed. They may attempt to make you feel guilty for no longer providing the same level of access. But you have to ask yourself a deeper question: changed from what? Perhaps you have not become colder. Perhaps you have simply become more conscious of your value. There is also a lesson here about communication. You do not need to announce every boundary dramatically. Sometimes the clearest boundary is behavioral. You stop responding to disrespect. You stop participating in unnecessary conflict. You stop making excuses for someone else's repeated behavior. And then you observe. If they respect the distance and change their behavior, perhaps there is something worth rebuilding. If they become more aggressive because they can no longer access you in the same way, you have learned something valuable. Either way, you gain clarity. This is why distance can be a form of self-respect. It prevents you from becoming trapped in relationships where your presence is continually demanded, but your dignity is continually ignored. Remember, your goal should never be to make people afraid of losing you. Your goal should be to become so grounded in your own principles that you are willing to leave situations that consistently violate them. Because when you know you can walk away, you stop negotiating against yourself. You no longer have to beg for basic respect. You no longer have to prove why your boundaries matter. You simply live according to them. And that is when distance becomes powerful, not because someone else fears your absence, but because you no longer fear creating it. The strongest boundary is the one you are willing to enforce without hatred, drama, or apology. And this leads us to the deepest lesson of all. The most powerful form of ignoring is not anger, revenge, or the desire to make someone chase you. It is indifference. There is a major difference between ignoring someone because you are desperately hoping they will notice your absence and stepping away because their behavior no longer deserves your emotional energy. The first is still dependence. The second is freedom. If you constantly check whether someone has noticed that you stopped responding, you are still giving them control. If you post something hoping they will see it, if you wonder whether they are jealous, if you keep checking whether they have contacted you, then psychologically you have not really walked away. Your body may have created distance, but your mind is still standing at the door waiting for their reaction. That is not indifference. Real indifference begins when their reaction stops determining your emotional state. This is a difficult achievement because human beings naturally seek recognition. We want to be understood. We want apologies from people who hurt us. We want those who rejected us to realize what they lost. We want disrespectful people to regret their behavior. But consider what happens when you make someone else's realization part of your emotional recovery. You remain connected to them. You are still waiting for them to give you something: validation, regret, recognition, an apology, or proof that you mattered. Freedom begins when you no longer require any of those things. This does not mean you become incapable of caring. In fact, genuine emotional independence allows you to care without becoming controlled. You can appreciate someone without needing their approval. You can love someone without surrendering your identity. You can forgive someone without inviting them back into your life. And you can walk away without turning your departure into a performance. That is a much deeper form of strength. The person who has reached this level no longer asks, "How can I make them miss me?" They ask, "Why am I giving this person so much space in my mind?" That question can be transformative because your attention is not merely time, it is life. Every hour spent replaying an argument, monitoring someone's behavior, imagining their reaction, or trying to prove your worth is an hour that cannot be recovered. You cannot control what someone thinks about you. You cannot control whether they regret losing you. You cannot control whether they eventually understand your value. But you can control what you do with your attention today. And that is where psychological freedom begins. Instead of trying to become unforgettable to someone who does not value you, become deeply committed to building a life that does not depend on being remembered by them. Work on your character, strengthen your discipline, develop your abilities, protect your peace. Invest in relationships where respect flows in both directions. Eventually, something remarkable happens. The person you once wanted to notice your absence becomes less important, not because you defeated them, but because you outgrew the need for their recognition. That is the real meaning of walking away. Not hatred, not revenge, or not silence designed to manipulate. Simply the quiet realization that your life is too valuable to be organized around someone else's behavior. So if you ever choose to ignore someone, ask yourself why. If the purpose is revenge, you are still emotionally connected. If the purpose is manipulation, you are still seeking control. But if the purpose is protecting your peace, preserving your dignity, and redirecting your attention toward what matters, then your silence has become something much more meaningful. It has become freedom. The ultimate power is not making someone regret losing you. It is reaching the point where you no longer need them to.